Mr. Cobb, it's so nice to see you, and I'm so happy that you're here. And thank you so much for joining us on another great interview at American Aboriginals. And we are just so excited because we love talking to people about their roots, where they're coming from, where they're going, all of that stuff. So I just want to get started and have you introduce yourself and let people know who you are and where you're from to start.
My name is Duane Cobb. I turned 50 this year. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, specifically Jefferson Park. Lived here almost my entire life, except for 5 years of college in Santa Cruz and a summer I spent in Baltimore.
Wow.
I came home. I was an educator for LAU Unified School District for 17 years, first as a teacher and then later as an assistant principal. I then later moved on to Department of Labor Job Corps and became a director of social development in their programs. And now I work sometime later, 12 years later, I work in HR for the city of West Hollywood. And I also dabble in writing, copy, and film and television.
That is amazing.
And I have strong opinions about everything.
Well, that's why we want to talk to you because, this is really a discussion about, where we're going in this world right now, particularly as Aboriginal people with a very diverse background. And I think what's happening, and you can educate me too, it feels like there's a shift, right? People are not just taking the history from history books, they're actually going deeper and saying to themselves, wait a
Well,
second, I have some questions here.
and it depends on how old you are and where you were educated.
Yes.
Because what has happened and what is apparent now, and it was apparent to me when I entered education in 1996, that we have 50 states, we have 50 different levels of education.
That's
And
right.
long story short, one of our worst presidents, in my opinion, George W. Bush, he did something that was brilliant. Most civilized Western democracies, Germany, the UK, Japan, etc., Australia, they all have a national high school exit exam. So that there is like a national standard. And to me, just on a basic like hood level, we're not sending any idiots out in the world representing our country.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, to this day, we still have 50 states with 50 different high school diplomas. And as we all well know, some things that the rest of us take as basic fundamental science, hygiene, um, social progress, etc., other states have utilized education to work around that and inserted, their morals, their doctrines, and things of that nature. And so then we have the problems that we have now. So it's really tough, and so that um, really informed like who I am in terms of like where we are now, because
Yes.
this is one of the first times in almost human history where we're not all evolved at the same level.
You make an excellent point about all 50 states because we really do feel like we're in different countries, 50 mini countries. And yet we are trying to have discussions from all those 50 perspectives, right? And it's generational, it's
Yes.
regional. And again, it goes back to what level of education did you have?
And exposure, like you said, generational, what was
Yes.
going on that way, and then diversity in terms of what type of people were you interacting with.
Yes.
It's far more complex than people want to kind of allude to, and
Yeah.
which makes the country, the question of us as American Aboriginals even more complex.
Absolutely. And you probably are aware of this too, particularly being here in Los Angeles, is that a lot of people don't even know the history of LA, of how it was formed, what this the city looked like before we saw all of these skyscrapers and what have you.
El
You
Pueblo
know,
de la Reina de Los Angeles.
absolutely. People that look like you and me. But
Yes.
now you look at the city now and it's incredibly diverse still.
And
But
even before those 22 families that founded Los Angeles, if you're not Chumash, you really don't have an ancestral stake to this land.
yeah, yeah, that's deep. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that.
That's just something I've always felt as an African American, and even like the matriarch of my family, and someone we'll probably get into, Eliza Daniels. She was born in 1900, and she's as far back as I can go. And that is by her design. She refused to speak on her life.
Mhm.
And I think some of it was definitely Reconstruction era, sharecropping, pretty much slavery conditions that shouldn't have been in Oklahoma and Texas. And she was just like, we're starting from here. Y'all know
Yes.
me. And
Yes.
so that really informed for me. I had kind of do you remember the character Giancarlo Esposito played in School Days? Dean, Brother
Yes.
Almighty.
Yes, I do. Yes, yes.
And then the dialogue he has with Lawrence Fishburne, and he says, "We are
Right.
without question Black Americans. I am from
Yes.
Detroit,
Right.
Motown."
I've never been to Africa. Yes, I
Like,
remember that so vividly.
and
So
I
vividly.
remember, like, yes, that's how I've always felt. Like, I feel connected to the diaspora, no doubt,
Yeah.
from the Caribbean to the motherland.
Mm-hmm.
But I am from Jefferson Park, LA, bruh. And this is how I get down. Like, this is a conscious,
Right.
this is the popular culture I have aligned myself with. And
Right.
for me, it's that and hip hop. And like,
Yeah.
that is going to be, I always tell my daughter, I was like, the music you love is the music you loved at 16. Period. My mother is Gladys Knight and the Pips.
That's right. That's right.
No matter who came before, who came after,
That's right.
that's her music. And I'm kind of like, yo, when I was 16, that was 1988. That was golden era hip.
Right. It was the
So,
80s and
and I tell people,
90s.
I was like 88, I had Public Enemy, NWA,
Right.
De La Soul. It doesn't
Right.
get any more eclectic than that.
No, it does not. It does not.
And for me,
Yeah.
that would be a defining, like, that's me. Those eclectic interests.
Absolutely. That is so, so deep. And when you talk about your grandmother,
Yes.
I feel, my goodness, pulling information out of my grandmother was like pulling teeth. So a lot of the oral history I got from the family was from my mother because she was more willing to talk. She repeated what she had heard. But I
Yes.
remember, this is a true story. My uncle, and this is before he passed, not too long ago, he passed earlier this year. And I remember asking him about a couple of years ago, and I knew that he was getting older. I said, Uncle Junior, I want to interview you. And he
Mhm.
said, he's from Louisiana. He said, what you talking about? I said, Uncle Junior, I want to interview you. I want to find out more about the family. And you know what he told me? He's like, nope, I'm not talking about that. And his face was stone cold. He was serious. He did not want to go there, was not talking about it. And if I wanted information, I was not going to get it from him.
I, 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 it's the same. The matriarch, Miss Eliza Daniel, she wasn't giving up Jack ever.
Yep.
But what I was able to do, so her daughter, my grandmother, I was her baby. So what happened was she had my mom, and that's a whole nother thing, in 42, and she was 16. And she and her husband got moved to California because of the war. So my mom was raised in Texas with her grandparents. So the stories I get about Miss Eliza, are from both of them, from spending time with both of them. Because by the time my mom moved to California, and I was like, I'm the only child of an only child.
Yeah.
So I spent every weekend from 0 to 12 with my grandparents, and my grandmother told me stories all weekend, every weekend while we played cards. I'll just say that. We played.
Nice.
We're going to get to her. If we get through the questions, then we'll get to her.
Okay.
Because I'm telling you, she's who let me know, like, I need to be writing this down. I need to be documenting. Like, this is awesome. So, but like you said, it was like pulling water from a rock. And sometimes it would take my grandmother needing a couple of daiquiris. Or my mom not realizing, I'm like, this is like a therapy session. Like because we started to have deeper conversations when I would come home from college.
Nice.
Like, I'd be away for 6 months and come back, and we talked till 3, 4 in the morning. And so I kind of, from the two of them, I kind of pieced together, and then from other family members, this amalgam of our matriarch. And to give you an example, she was about 5'8", 5'9", very slim, very much my complexion. To me, she always resembled, like, she and Cicely Tyson could have been sisters.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, she was born in 1900 and I was born in 72. So she was old when I met her.
Yeah.
But it was like strong, like her arm looked like leather. You know what I mean? Like, and when she spoke, it just was like oak. Like, it hit you all in the ear, and like, it was just very strong and powerful. And I always remember that about her. And then I remember her husband, my great-grandfather, he had passed before I was born. His name was Porterfield Shelton.
Okay.
And he was a fair man, which to this day, like, that's kind of a thing within us. A dark-skinned woman finds a light-skinned man, or a dark-skinned man. Nobody wants to be with who they are.
Exactly. I know that. Yeah, if I've seen that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he was fair. He was peanut butter colored, and my grandmother was very mahogany. And they got together and they had 5 children. And my grandmother and they had 3 girls, 2 boys. And my grandmother was the 4th or 5. And coincidentally, my grandfather was 4th or 5 on the other side, with a family with 3 boys and 2 girls. Wow. Yeah.
Wow. So, did you learn any stories about him?
His first story that I know about him starts at 18. I can go in there.
Wow. That's deep.
Okay.
So, wow. Yeah, I love to, and I guess I'll back up a little bit before we dive into that, because you touched on something really important about history and obtaining that. And at what point, and what age did you know you had to get this information? Was it when you were in college, when you were hearing these stories, or was it when you were younger? Because that informs so much, because by the time I really figured out I needed to get all of these stories, I was probably in my 30s, right? But it sounds like you were starting this journey much earlier.
So I thought about this too when we were talking. I was like, this is going to come up. I am by no means a hotep. What is known as a hotep. I am by no means what is known as a hotep. Okay. All right. Like I said, I am very much Black American.
Right.
Like Dean Big Brother Almighty. But if nothing, like, there are things across the diaspora that endure. And one of them, and the one that kind of endured for me, was the griot.
Mm-hmm.
And my first griot was Gordon Parks. I remember Time Life magazine at my grandparents' house, and I was like, he did the pictures and the words, and then next thing I know, he's doing movies and doing whatever, and I'm just like, yeah, he's just the voice. And that, and then when I went to Santa Cruz and we started talking about what a griot was, and I met more people throughout the diaspora that were like educated more than I was. And I was just like, yeah, great. And then hip hop, I was like, dude, that's literally the voice of the people.
Right.
Like, and we used to talk about it in the beginning of hip hop, like when they were trying to, is it music? It was like, we don't care.
Right.
It's hip hop. You guys can waste your time trying to define it. We're grooving.
Yeah.
We're grooving. So I at least realized in college when I began, I would come home, play cards with my grandmother, so my grandmother and I, our love language was cards, and my mother and I, ours was cooking. Yeah. So I was her sous chef, and then I played cards with my grandmother. Yeah. And I realized I didn't have to do anything, simply be there. The stories would flow. And from that, I started to realize, like, I need to be the cataloger of these stories, because our family, we're kind of a bunch of loners. You know, I'm the only child of an only child, and I have an only child.
You go through the oral history.
Yes.
And then you start moving into the more formal dynamics of going into archives, you're going into books, you're going into these places that historically you want to get a reference.
Right.
So in terms of genealogy, how far have you really dived deep? Like, how far back do you go? Like, what is your process, your research process?
So I haven't been as diligent. So in terms of, I have the public records for my grandmother in 1900 and my grandfather in, I believe, 1903 or 4. She was a couple years older than he. Mm-hmm. And then all the public records like since, and then the stories anecdotal. But what happened was my mother, so those genealogy sites are a thing. There was a Cobb, because my last name is Cobb. So let me rewind a bit. Eliza Daniels meets Porterfield Shelton. They have the Shelton clan. And then Naomi Shelton, my grandmother, meets Jesse Cobb. Okay. And so that's how I get the Cobb. So a member of the Cobb, but the Cobbs and all of those people must have hung together, because all our records are Oklahoma, Waco, like. Yeah. And then everybody made the California migration after the war.
Wow. Okay.
Or during the war.
Okay.
And that was there were like 2 great Black migrations. The first one during the First World War, because what happens is you need us for the war. We work in the war, and we're like, I'm not going back to be second class. Yeah. And I'm trained now at better jobs.
That's right.
And so after World War II, everybody was California, because GM was out here, McDonnell Douglas was out here, Hughes Aircraft was out here. Yeah, I worked on planes in the war. I worked on tanks in the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's so deep.
So the LA of the 70s, when I grew up out here, Jefferson Park, like, it was so Black, and it had to be, like, to me, it reminded, like what they say, DC, Chocolate City. Mm-hmm. Or Chicago when Harold Washington was mayor, you know, like it was so Black and so prosperous. I didn't think it would ever end. Wow. Until like 84, Reagan. Like I didn't, didn't.
That's deep.
Yeah. Growing up here as a kid, it was just like, oh, it hasn't always been this, like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's deep stuff. I moved to LA, what was it, about 2013, but we had always come for a visit. We lived in San Diego when I was a child, and so we'd always drive up. And back then it took about 2 hours. Yes. Now it's probably double. And and we always would come to my father's his mother had a best friend here, and she lived in Compton. Right. So we would come and we would visit her, but she was always very mindful. And she said, we closing these windows, we were locking everything up after a certain time. So we always had to leave at a certain time from San Diego to get to her house, because we didn't want to be here after a certain time at night. So I remember that about coming here.
But you know what's so funny? Back when that time, Compton had 3 parts. It had like a hood, it had its own Black Beverly Hills. some really nice houses on the northern border. And then it had a lot of rural land, like you still had black cowboys and people raising goats and
That's
orange
deep.
groves. Like it was really a urban, suburban country.
That's deep.
Black folks were country. I remember going to Compton and being like, oh, we're going to see the country black people.
You know, I did not know this part of. I didn't know this. You should write a book about this.
Because we know each other through Nakawa, right? Nakawa Shepherd.
Yes.
Ask Nakawa, Long Beach, and like all of that was still kind of unincorporated back in the 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And it was kind of country. It was kind of like Devil in the Blue Dress.
Wow.
And that's when Central Avenue was Crenshaw. Central Avenue was the black Mecca.
Wow.
Like the through line.
That's so deep.
Yeah.
So deep. Wow.
Oh, yeah.
LA has such a rich history. And we don't talk enough about, you know, the Afro Latinos that created this. We don't talk enough about that time period. And I remember at Job Corps, I was working at Job Corps and I was telling the students about Biddy Mason.
Mm-hmm.
And then they didn't even know who she was. They're like, Miss J, they don't teach us this.
They don't.
I'm like, wow, how do you not hear about this woman who's like shaped this city in the 1850s?
Yeah.
Plus, she was part of that landmark case when she obtained her freedom, which a lot of people don't realize that there's a real big legal case around her. It's not just, oh, Biddy Mason. There's a historical legal case.
I don't want to. If you allow me, I'll just go grab my remote control because I have the DVR because I don't want to forget his name. But do you realize that it was a black man who was a major architect of Los Angeles, and he designed the Beverly Hills Hotel, the famous
I did not know that.
That was a brother.
I did not know that.
I will get you. Give me one moment. You can
absolutely.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
Let me find it.
Okay.
Yeah.
This
but yes,
so deep.
It was a black, and he designed the Beverly Hills hotel and couldn't stay there while it was under construction. And afterwards, when they were doing like the punch list, yeah, he had to stay out in the public areas. He couldn't be in he had to stay in common areas. On the hotel, insane. He was the architect.
Yes. Wow.
Yes.
It's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Wow.
Oh, there it is. Hollywood architects. Paul R. Williams.
What? Yeah. I will have to look him up, research him for sure.
Wow. Paul R. Williams defies the odds and becomes one of the most successful architects in the U.S., designing for celebrities, including Frank Sinatra and Lucille Ball, and iconic buildings such as Beverly Hills Hotel and LAX Airport. So he is the city.
Get out.
It's like him and Frank Lloyd Wright are LA.
What?
And you don't know his name. He did the airport.
I do not know his name.
Paul R. And so I'm 50 years old, been in this town my whole life, consider myself a pretty good historian.
Yeah.
I can tell you how how Black Panther Party turned into Bloods and Crips right after Bunchy got shot.
Wow.
Like it's a straight line. But I didn't know about Paul Williams. That's crazy.
That is insane.
So
what is it? And this goes to something deeper. And we see this across the country, this kind of erasing or minimizing of our contributions to various things, whether it be our towns, our educations. So I feel
even our existence.
Well, hey, that's a whole nother conversation.
To your point, to our town, like they act like Rosewood and they never existed.
That's it. You know, here's the thing that I find fascinating, but also encouraged by, is that now more and more of us are getting access to this information, because when we were growing up, we didn't have the internet. Everything was microfiche. You know, if you wanted to find something, you had to literally go get a book. Now the research is a lot more accessible. And because of that, I think that's also creating this shift to this movement of people getting information quicker. They have it at their fingertips. They can read at their leisure, and you can actually, I don't want to say do research faster, but you don't have to wade through, miles and miles of microfiche
And you don't
and
have to be an
books.
academic.
Absolutely, because a lot of that stuff, I remember sometimes when I was going to college, I went to the University Washington. You had to have
Go
special
Huskies.
permission, Huskies, yeah. You had to have permission to go in some of these special collection libraries, and you could not. You had to sit there. You almost had to be like, I don't want to say desanitized, but the librarians were literally watching over your shoulder while you were looking through these old books.
So can I tell you something to that point?
Yes.
I have all it I have never learned the deepest parts of my Blackness from other Black people.
Yeah.
I've learned it from academia, actually.
That's right. That's right.
Because the knowledge was always there.
Always.
And I'm talking about,
Always.
I was a kid, I got bused at 8 years old. I'm of the first busing generation. I
Me
got
too.
bused.
Yeah.
I got bused from 36 and Van Ness to Brentwood Science Magnet in 1980.
Yep, I know that well.
And then from there, I went to Hancock Park and John Burroughs, and then Cheviot Hills and Hamilton, and then Santa Cruz with the hippies. And I learned about Paul Robeson there. I learned about Tulsa race riots there. Like, in other words, they've had access to it. It's been there. The things that I heard as rumors in Black world, I had positive evidence. I was being taught by these progressive, mostly Jewish teachers. But I was like, no, the knowledge has always been here. And why do they make it elite? Because they plucked me out of the ghetto and put me over here. Why? And so I took it home.
Right.
And all of us who did, we took it home. And I think a lot of what you're seeing now is a lot of us, the newness being with our kids. Because amongst each other, amongst you and I, it's like what I just told you about Paul R. Williams, like, wow, another one.
Yeah.
And you realize it, and you realize it, like, for me, it's like, like being a man raising two daughters, like I'm always going to have to fight against the chauvinism I was raised with in this country.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm never just going to be able to say, oh, I'm fully woke. No, you're not.
Yeah.
No, you'll never be fully woke on anything, not on that, not on LGBTQ, anything that you inherently are not, you inherently need, you're a lifelong learner. So I have gone deeper. I found a cousin found my mother and I, a Cobb.
Nice.
And he's gone even deeper, and our roots are in Sierra Leone. And he just got back. He came back. He just went to Sierra Leone. So it's a cousin. He lives in the Bay Area, he and his partner, and super sweet guy, just super incredible person. Yeah. And then he was telling us about something in Sierra Leone and us being able maybe to go over there and have rights and privileges and maybe have dual citizenship. So that's an evolving beyond what I've been able to do. Yeah. And that's because of, like you were saying, technology, 24andMe, like they start connecting people. Right.
Yes.
And he found my mother and I through Miss Eliza. Like I said, she's the matriarch. Yes. She's the linchpin there. And then to your point, on the other part, for my daughter, I was like, I need to do more and know more, and including for myself, because for myself, I was, to tell you how strongly that I'm just set, like I play the cards I'm dealt. I told you I'm the only child of the only child. I'm part of that. And this is a whole nother thing of the Black experience. If you were a baby in the 70s, I was raised by a single mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like every boy and girl, so where's my dad? And I remember being 5 years old and my mom telling me essentially, he doesn't want to have anything to do with us. And I was like, I just knew my person. I was like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with somebody who doesn't want to have anything to do with me. So good riddance, I'm good. So it's just me and you. Good enough. Let's go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that wasn't good enough for my daughter. To me,
Mm-hmm.
I felt she deserved more. And so, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so deep. So incredibly deep. And yes, trust me, this conversation will continue. We were going to have more of these, but I'm not done yet. I have definitely one question for you.
Yeah.
And I want to pose this because as an educator, your influence is huge, right? So
Try to be.
so my question to you, and I know it's a pretty general one, but how can educators go deeper? And it could be there's a political reason why, or there's a systemic reason why. How do we go deeper into this quote unquote American history so that we have a deeper understanding as to who we are? And I'll just say, hey, this is Los Angeles. How can we teach, this historical stuff that you and I have been talking about this afternoon in LA, in LA schools? How do we do this?
It's not. So, I used to be an assistant principal. I used to be a curriculum writer.
Okay.
It's not difficult at all, right? So, writing
Mm.
curriculum is kind of like fleshing out a skeleton. Okay. You have local, state, and federal prerequisites or
Mhm.
mandates or guidelines, things you must do, right? So, those are your bones, right?
Yeah.
And then you have how you get there. What does that look
Mm.
like in the real world? And that's
Mm.
how well you flesh out the tendons, which connect to the muscles to make all those various bones and divisions and parts work together well, right? So I tell people, handle your. My grandfather was a handyman. He said, keep it simple, son. Kiss. Take care of all of those mandates first. Make sure all the bones connect to the tendons, connect to the muscles so the organism can function and move freely, right?
Mhm.
And then anything you want to do beyond that, you want to put it in a polo shirt or Versace or Givenchy or whatever, that's gravy. That's icing. And no one's ever stopped a teacher from going above and beyond
Yeah, okay.
unless it conflicts with their some moral issue or religious issue or some deep help. But teaching them extra, no one's ever complained about that. And that's what I
Mhm.
always did instinctively as a teacher, and then tried to teach instinctively once I was an administrator instructing teachers. Is like, okay, I would tell people, everybody loves a birthday cake because of the icing and the candles. But what I need you to get really good at as a teacher is baking yellow cake. Just bake yellow
Yeah.
cake. A
Yeah.
really tasty, maybe even 7-Up cake, because I prefer 7-Up cake. Can you make me a delicious 7-Up cake
Nice.
10 times out of 10? Because if you can, we can always put the icing and the sprinkles and the candles on it. That stuff
Right.
never,
Yeah.
that stuff's never going anywhere. And
Right.
you know what I mean? So teach the mandates first and teach them efficiently and efficaciously. So then, because with history, it's always going to be tied closely to what you're personally invested in or find
Sure.
interesting or have a stake in. So
Right.
even regardless if I'm an African American teaching Latino history, for me, I love the Chicano experience. That's a specific experience. Those are the kids I grew up with. So when we
Mhm.
get into that part of history, I'm going to speak specifically to the Chicano LA, your second generation born here, but your parent, like, I'm going to get into those specifics.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that way, like, no, I'm not Chicano. No, I'm not
Mhm.
Latino, but dude, you know about me. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you took an
Right.
interest, bro. And nuance and texture and like, yes. And
Right.
and and that's and that was the thing that always struck me is like I'm learning I'm learning the dates and the facts and I'm seeing pictures about Tulsa and things and I'm like, but I'm doing it in my elitist classes.
Yeah.
This information
Yeah.
isn't for the masses.
Totally,
So
totally.
as a teacher, I think, they tell people, and I used to think it was like kind of and it still kind of is an ugly thing to say, teach to the middle, because they
Mm,
mean in terms of intelligence, but I mean in terms of content, like everyone should have access to this information.
absolutely. You know, my teaching was really around the arts. I used to teach playwriting in high schools and middle school students in Seattle. And I found that when you can communicate and basically how to approach that individual student, they're there with you. It doesn't matter their level of understanding of writing or plays or anything of that nature. They're with you along the way because you connected with them on some level. You respect them, you respect their knowledge. Because sometimes the kid in the back, he's the smartest one. That's what I've
Most
just,
times,
you
most
know,
times.
and that was my education. I had one student, he didn't look like he was really engaged, and I would call on him and he would sometimes answer. But this kid wrote the deepest sci-fi play that I ever read. I was like, whoa, yeah, he was listening the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
So I
And,
find that we have to give our youth a chance. We there's they're geniuses. We just don't know it.
there's something. So Nakawa and I worked together at Job Corps,
Yeah.
and so I can't take credit for this. And it's something that it's a Job Corps motto, and you're familiar. Then you're probably familiar with it.
Mhm.
Model, mentor, monitor.
Yep.
So to
Yep.
your question of what can be done better in education, the modeling part, like number one, as a teacher, I automatically let students know, one, I know more than you, but two, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
going to stump me. And when
Yep.
you do, my answer is, I don't know. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Let's go do research. And
Yeah.
I want to teach, like, be a lifelong learner. Go get the information your damn self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to that, the modeling part and being honest and just saying, like, there are parts I don't know that we can explore together in terms of
Yeah.
this, even especially with this heritage stuff.
Out of your 50 years of experience,
Yes.
being raised in Oklahoma and now living in LA, what have you learned right now on your journey? Uh,
Well, actually, I need to go visit. I've never been to Oklahoma. I've never
okay,
been to Waco, Texas, where
okay.
like, I talk about it like I've been there, and I talk about it because the stories are that, like, they talk about my grandfather working at the mill and being a deacon, and like that just made, he was like a baller in town. They talk about the town and how it was split in half. So, but I haven't been to Oklahoma. I haven't been to Waco. I've been born and raised in LA, so I'm a city kid. But what was the second part of the question? To my perspective in terms of,
Like, what have you learned? Just like
oh man,
in your 50 years of experience and just living, what have you discovered about yourself?
that I really am a Cobb and a Shelton and a Daniels, all the names that make up my family, because I thought I was supposed to have this plan, like you go to school, then you go to college, then you have a job for 30 years, and you get a gold watch and you retire. It has not been that kind of perfect arc journey. It's been way more, and it's still, with a pandemic we're all in the midst of. And to me, it let me know that I was going to be okay because I was built of stronger stuff. You know, my grandmother. So take, for example, my mother was born 1942, middle of the Second World War. My grandfather's 18, my grandmother's 16. He's
Mm.
immediately shipped off from Waco, Texas to San Pedro, California, kind of like those Port Chicago soldiers up in the Bay Area, to load them ships, load them bombs on them ships. My grandmother can't find work in LA, but because of another kind of notorious past of my family on the other side, like, we got more conversations to be had. She gets a job in Las Vegas at the Moulin Rouge dealing blackjack.
Mm.
So my mother is an infant in Waco. My grandmother is 16 in Vegas dealing blackjack. Her husband is 18 loading bombs on ships for the war. And they see each other on the weekends when they drive basically to like, what's the city in between LA? It's not Modesto.
Barstow.
Barstow. They meet kind of in Barstow, meet at a motel for black folks. And that's when they like, and I was like, well, if they can do that, I think I can graduate college and have a family and go through some stuff. I can do regular American
life. Right. You're like, that's a lot of traveling now.
That's a lot of traveling now, and they're doing it in 1940s vehicles and stuff. Right. And that was a lot of love, and you only get to have sex with one black person per state. Right. You know what I mean? That's a lot of old timey just getting it done and wanting to do it. Right. And I've never been afraid of anything like that, just kind of based on my grandparents, just kind of like, yeah, they were doing that as teenagers. What am I complaining about? What am I doing? And kind of the perspective that I can do anything and we can go through anything and we can, and that's kind of what always propelled me.
Right. What now, the last question.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had a lot of experience,
yes.
And the knowledge is infinite, right?
Yes.
What knowledge could you impart with us? That's the highest knowledge that you know right now that you can give us before you leave, before this meeting is over. What can you give? I'm talking about some knowledge that you think I can't share with, I ain't share with too many people, but you know what I'm saying? But
I'm gonna share it with you. with you. And it's common, but it's forgotten daily, right? The rarest thing in the known human universe is original thought. Something that hasn't been regurgitated, that it didn't exist before. And within our lifetime, things like microwaves, computers would be physical example. Like in the 20,000 years, it didn't exist. Nobody thought to do that. That's an original thought. So what I'm going to tell you is not an original thought, so I can't take credit for it. But I believe the highest form of knowledge right now is, and especially if you're a member of the diaspora and the everlasting symbol of the diaspora, if you ask anybody, whether they be in West Africa, South Africa, Jamaica, the UK, it's the Sankofa bird. And if you're not familiar with the Sankofa bird is a bird whose feet are facing forward, eyes are facing you, the viewer, and whose beak is facing backwards. And that means that even in every moment as a Black person, your perspective in that moment should be, you're in the moment, remembering your past and what all those generations that brought you to that moment, right, and using that perspective with an eye towards your future, right, where the beak is headed. And so for me, that's always the highest, because that's where, as a writer, that's where all my best ideas come from, being in the moment and kind of contextualizing an amalgam of ideas, and now I'm going to create something new from it.
So taking all the knowledge and all the experiences that you've seen and then create something original and new from it.
Yeah, there are very few originators, but you could go to me in the thought sport, you can go to the Hall of Fame as being a competent facsimile, because you can still create new things. You can take all of it and through your perception of it, contextualize it into it's a new thing. It might not be a completely new idea no one's ever thought of before, but it can get you to the Hall of Very Great and to the Hall of Very Satisfied within your soul, within your understanding of a skill set or a trade or a concept or what have you. I don't think there's any higher form.
Because to expound on that, because you're different. And even though it may appear, like that person's done it, but it's different because you're doing it and you're bringing your experiences to the table.
And I'm happy being a clever facsimile. If that's my life's existence, is being a really good, clever facsimile, I'm good with that. And it just means that maybe something I contextualize, another person won't have to go where I had to go to the bottom of the ocean to find that information and recontextualize it in a contemporary package. Maybe the next person, and that's how science is built, on past research.
Right.
I don't have to go do, like, there's precedent. That's how there are precedents. Right. And so I think it's just, again, that's, to me, if you look at laws and how at knowledge and how humans just instinctively formalize knowledge, it's what
I know what you're talking about, the laws. I know what you're talking about, the laws, the laws of the universe, the cycles in which we operate. Is that correct?
Creation and destroy. A dying star becomes a black hole, which becomes a new star. It's gravity implodes, chaos theory. It's going to implode upon itself and it's going to create something new.
And as they say, as above, so below. And as below, so above. Duane Cobb, I want to thank you for giving us your wisdom and sharing with us your knowledge and your gifts and your presence. Chris, you have anything to say?
No, this this is why Brian is the host too, because he's deep. He's on a whole nother level. And so that's why I love having us as a team here, because he's going to ask things that above me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Cool. And again, like I said, this is cathartic. This is because just as much, you started telling your stories, Brian. I love to hear, like, this is what we used to do. I always like to tell people when I'm in crisis, whatever type of crisis, I always scale it down. We're a village of 100 people. What's my role there? What would I do if this problem happened in that village? And because this is what we used to do when it was small like that, we commiserated with one another. We talked through.
Right.
I was just telling my daughter the other day, you drive down, I'm from South Central LA, and a lot of those old houses in South Central, they have porches. We were on those porches. People were on those porches. They were playing dominoes or playing spades or hanging out or watching, or just people watching and being nosy. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you don't see that anymore. We were community, like you could always catch people on the porch hanging out.
Yes.
And we were city country at the same time.
Yeah.
I can feel that, because I've met a lot of people from South Central that never been to Hollywood. I'm like, it's just 15 minutes.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that?
I guess to get it.
Well, especially in the 70s and 80s, see, people don't realize Hollywood was like the same as Times Square, New York in the 70s and 80s. It was where you wanted to go get prostitutes and see skin flicks and buy drugs. They cleaned it up, but it wasn't like, we got that here. I got drugs and prostitutes over here at the Snooty Fox. I don't need to go to Hollywood.
Right. I got you.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So, but thank you both for your time and thinking I'm interesting enough to speak to.
Yeah.
I got one more question. I got one more question. Your enlightenment, what triggered your enlightenment? What event happened for you to become like, oh?
So it was a combination of, I was finding that all the best Black knowledge was trapped in white schools. And so, number one, I started getting bussed out in 1980. I was 8 years old. So I got bussed to Brentwood. I got bussed out to Hancock Park. If you know anything about LA, that's an affluent neighborhood. And then I got bussed to Cheviot Hills. And then I got into a hippie college where out of all the UCs, it's the children of all the richest families. And it's usually, that means that they all the screw ups who couldn't get into Berkeley or anywhere else. So it was hilarious. So I'm used to being around privilege. And I was like, why is my pain privileged information? And so I've always been like a griot. I want to take the information and come back and cry it to the rest of town. Here's what's going on. They're lying to you. They've been like, so that was half of it. And then the second half was for my daughter. I didn't really care so much about for myself knowing, but for her. And then also, she's only 50% me. She's 50% someone else. And they have a rich history and lineage and heritage. And I want to be able to, like, I don't want her to feel incomplete. I wanted her to feel balanced. And then from there, it was like a rabbit hole. And then I kind of stopped for a while. And then the technology actually connected family for me more than, connected me to a cousin up in the Bay Area who had done even more research and went to Sierra Leone. And so it's, I can't really say it's one precipitating event for me. And I almost, it's like, to me, that question is, you're going to get as many answers as there are Black people. We are not monolithic. For somebody, it might have been my mother died and I needed to know, or for a medical condition. And that was one of the primary things when I left LA and started to travel and went to college. There is no Black like me. Nobody's Black like you, Brian. Nobody's Black like you. And I realized even at HBCUs, when they have beefs and the Chicago people don't like the New York people, and like, we will find ways to divide each other. So stop it and just listen to the other. And so that's why, like, you're listening to me. I'm interested to listen to you. That's the key thing. And that sum total of listening and telling.
You are a wealth of walking information about LA. I will talk to you about LA. Like that, just that alone is so much. So if you have not started writing your memoir, you should start doing that. You should start doing that. Yes, yes. And please, one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why should we, as Black Americans, Aboriginals, however people want to call themselves, why must we continue this history, particularly for the youth who believe it doesn't matter?
Because we were the first people here. And I'm sorry, probably because I'm biased, because I am an African American, but we were the first people here and nobody's been through what we've been through. I kind of feel like we're going to be the last ones too. And I believe I'm a descendant of, and like I said, we'll talk other times, because through my grandma, through my family, I'm a descendant of Black vaudeville, and that needs to continue to exist. And all of those traditions, all of our heritage, the griot, the town crier, that person who says, no, the king is not wearing any clothes.
Right.
That's always been a part of our telling it like it is.
Yes.
That's always been a part of our culture. Yeah. And so there are things that I love about my daughter and my daughter's generation that they don't have to deal with and that aren't issues for them. But at the same time, there are traditions and there are things that need to endure because they're humanity at its best. And that's why they've endured and stayed with us and sustained us and maintained us and helped us to evolve beyond the passage, Jim Crow, all of the things that continue to go on, glass ceilings, gaslighting, and that's I'll end it with this. The older I was never a big James Baldwin fan in my youth, because I was more Nikki Giovanni. I was more overtly revolutionary. And I realize it as I'm getting to 50 and just letting the smooth taste get to me. And like James Baldwin said, to be Black and intelligent isn't to be in a constant state of rage. Because the more you know, the more you have to kind of be angry about, but you kind of need to be Arthur Ashe about it. You know,
Yes.
you need
Yeah.
to be cerebral about it, and kind of it's a
Mhm.
slow burn because it'll burn you up and burn you out.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. Oh my goodness.
And instead of taking that Paul R, and we're at the age now where that Paul R. Williams information, you're going to tell somebody, I just told you, like
Yes, indeed.
this is on
You better
film.
believe it. I'm
You
all
see what
over
I'm
that.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, yeah. So
Wow.
it's we're lifelong learners, even about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Duane, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So much. This was such an amazing opportunity to get to know you, to talk to you, to like get inside your head. I love that. You have so many deep, rich ideas, and people need to hear more about this and what you have to offer. And I definitely want you to come back and talk some more, and there'll be definitely more to talk about.
Thank you. And you are everything I expected and then some. You're a wonderful host. And I felt you make it easy to discuss these things. And I think that's another thing too. Like you were talking about, like connecting, and people have to be able to have outlets. Like for me, it was getting my mom to cook or my grandmother to play cards. It just took my vanity. Come talk about yourself and your family.
Yeah,
Sure thing. I can do that. So
yeah, yeah.
that's
Well,
true.
we all have fascinating stories and families that are beautiful and rich and all of that. You know, we are definitely unique fingerprints, to use a cliche. And and this is the mission here. I want to talk to as many families as I can, as many people as I can, because we're relegated to pictures in a book, right? And man, it's so much more deep in your passion for your family. That is what I want everyone to see as we continue this journey.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm here
thank
for all
you.
of it. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah,
Thank you for this
yeah,
space for us to
yeah,
share. So thank you.
yeah. Thank you. Yes, we'll talk soon, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Take care.
Awesome. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.